All right, looks like we have some people hopping in already. As you hop in, if you can see us and hear us, go ahead and let us know in the chat that you see us and hear us, and tell us who you are, where you're from, and maybe what you're excited about, excited to learn about with the with hybrid demos. All right, let's see in here. Let's see in here, very good. Cool, thank you, everyone. Chicago
in the house.
In the UK, Karen from Raleigh, Omaha.
Toronto, Colorado. Yay, who's my Colorado peeps out there? Rich. Netherlands.
So we're getting a nice group here.
International session.
Couple Philly.
Another Colorado, Rob, welcome.
Michigander just joined us. Sarah from Madrid, bienvenida, Sarah.
Oh, showing off there, Garrett.
All right, so as we get going here, let me share my screen. All right, we want to welcome everyone to our first Scaling Presales webinar of 2022, delivering successful hybrid demos. We've got Julie Hansen here with us. We're really excited to have you all here. This is going to be a great session. There's going to be really great content that Julie's prepared. And yeah, we want to make sure that we answer any questions that you have. And so keep them coming and let us know what you think as we go through this. There'll be plenty of opportunities to ask. I'm your host. I'm Garrett Erickson with the Consensus team. I'm a product marketing manager here. Been at Consensus for about a year and loving it. So great stuff going on, and we're excited to have you all with us. And to not take up so much of Julie's time, I'll give a quick intro. I've interacted with Julie over the last year on and off, as she's provided tons of thought leadership for us on sales, pre-sales relationships, on delivering successful demos. She's a former actress. Maybe she is currently working. She can clarify that, but she's got a lot of acting experience. I do believe she avoided the Law and Order bug, so she didn't act there. But she's able to delve into that acting experience and really focus on what makes a really compelling product demo and delivering that value prop. And so she's authored a couple of books about it. The latest one came out late last year called Look Me in the Eye. I'll post a link to that on Amazon here in the chat coming up. But we're super excited to have Julie with us as a repeat participant in our webinars. And with that, I'm going to stop my share and turn this over to you, Julie.
All right. Thanks for that, Garrett. Yeah, I'm not acting currently. And my joke was that I was the only actor in New York that never got a part on Law and Order. So that's my claim to fame. Anyway, I am super excited to be here with you guys and talk about a topic that has been certainly front and center for me, and I know for a lot of pre-sales and sales folks, which is this hybrid environment. So this is almost selfishly my attempt to kind of work through the challenges that I've faced as well. So as Garrett mentioned, I do a lot of work on helping teams with better demos. I'm also a partner with Great Demos, so do a lot of training of those workshops. Maybe I've worked with some of you. And then I also specialize in virtual selling, virtual presentations and demos. And my most recent book, Look Me in the Eye, Using Video to Build Relationships, is really my effort to help the business world connect as well on camera as actors and television reporters and professionals who have training in this area do. And so I bring a lot of those elements to that, and I'll throw some of those tips in today because there's really is our world, right? So delivering successful hybrid demos. Oh my gosh. Whether you've been doing hybrid demos or just starting to do them, Perhaps you've noticed there are a lot of things to think about. I mean, even just putting this presentation together, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many variables. So this is not going to be an exhaustive study of it by any means, but what I want to do is really touch on some guideposts and some truths and tactics that we need to adopt to make things run as smoothly as possible, because there are certainly going to be more of these in our future. If you haven't had a lot already, McKinsey says 90% of organizations are going to be adopting more, this combination of remote and on-site work. And so this is our reality. And this hybrid world creates a new set of challenges for us, as you may have noticed. We've got really all the challenges from connecting virtually, all the challenges from connecting live, and then this other set of challenges on top of that from trying to combine these two. And this happens, the challenges are slightly different, whether you're the one who's remote or you're the one who's on site. And again, variables are pretty numerous. So we're gonna sort our way through this and again, find some guidelines that we can follow that give us the best chance for success. I just want to throw out some of the specific challenges because I don't know how many people like hybrid demos, hybrid presentations, but the sense I get and the reaction I get from most people is like, please, one way or the other, right? And there's a reason for that, right? There's just a lot of considerations. Audio, it's hard to, you have to make sure both audiences can hear clearly. Visibility, what are people seeing on both groups? What are you seeing? Your attention is split. It's already pretty, we've got a lot of inputs to manage when we're just virtual, but then we've got, this live audience. So we've got another set of inputs and technology to manage. So lots of potential distractions, not just for you, the presenter, but for your audience. It's hard to engage. It's hard to connect. For one thing, it's hard to connect with the virtual audience at the same level as your live audience. And then it's also hard to remember to connect and engage when you've got so many balls in the air, right? That can get really lost in the translation. And it's very easy to just lose one part of your audience entirely. So we want to try to eliminate as much of these challenges as possible with some good planning and some good tactics that I want to share with you today. I really love what the CEO of Microsoft says, which is, how do we avoid this, what we call the either or demo, which is, we're either catering towards that remote audience or we're likely, especially if we're live, 99% of the time, we are heavily catering towards that in-person audience, and our remote audience gets left behind. And the CEO of Microsoft says, we want to ensure that those joining remotely always have a first-class experience. They're first-class participants. And I don't know if you would agree, but it seems to me that most remote participants in this situation are more like economy class, middle seat, no flight attendant in sight kind of experience, as opposed to this first class, being catered to type of experience. So the question is, how do we even that out? How do we make sure everyone is having a good experience, getting what they need out of the meeting? So what I'm going to cover is just some ways that we can set ourselves up for success, sort of eliminate some of those potential disasters and obstacles up front, how we manage both our face-to-face and our virtual audience, how to improve engagement and interaction, which often, again, falls by the wayside, how to gauge our different audiences' attention and interest, and then finally, how to use a producer or a champion to manage that flow and to really help you focus on the things that you need to focus on. All right, so the first consideration when we want to set ourselves up for success is thinking about, where are you? Where are you going to be presenting from? Because that indicates there's certain questions you need to address and find out beforehand. So what I want to do is just get a quick read here, and Garrett just put up a poll. If you would just let us know, where are you typically going to be presenting or doing your demo from? Are you typically going to be remote? Are you typically going to be on site with the client? Is it really 50-50? What is your situation? What does that look like? I'll give you 20 seconds to answer that. Let's see what does that look like for you? And it could be you've got a team member that's on site, but let's just talk about where are you going to be presenting from? All right, Garrett, you want to show the answer there? Okay, so it looks like, well, interesting. Very few on site, mostly remote, and about a third of you, it depends. So it could be maybe if it's a big opportunity that you would be on site as well. Okay, all right, good. So that's going to, affect how we're going to show up, right? And the things that we need to prepare. What we want to know is, first of all, we also need to know not just where we're going to be, but where's the sales rep, right? Is the sales rep, if we're remote, are they going to be on the site? Are they also going to be remote? So those are questions we need to determine at the outset. What I want to do is just give you some pros and cons of each scenario. Some of you are like, it depends, and this might help you understand where you're best positioned to connect with your audience. So when you think about it as being the remote presenter, certainly, you can't beat the travel, right? It's the best. It's easy to monitor those virtual participants. You're pretty much dealing with your tools, and someone on site is responsible for, the tools on that end, that technology. You can write things down, you can text and chat, just a little more flexibility in that area. However, of course, it's hard to manage that in-person audience, right? It's hard to keep their interest. You can't control their visual audio experience as much. You don't have hands-on control. It's difficult to hear those conversations they might be having between each other, the sidebars, see people come and go. And if you forget to look at your camera, you are disengaged not just from your live audience, but from your remote audience as well. So you're connecting with no one at that point. So that's something to consider. Now, as far as presenting on site, I know hands down, we love the energy, right? So you got more energy from that live audience, which is, fantastic. You can small talk easier with people when you're live. You can manage introductions, you can read that body language, you can gauge interest and make eye contact with your live audience. A lot of pluses there as well. Now, what happens is it's easy to forget entirely about that virtual audience, right? We will get drawn to that live audience, and it's easy for time to pass, and 15 minutes have passed and you haven't checked on your virtual audience, right? So we're looking at a way to remedy that. It's hard to read that remote body language, whether you're on site or whether you're on the virtual call. Reading virtual body language is a challenge. You have to manage both tool sets, technology. It's easy to miss that remote audience's questions. If you are live and you're moving around, you can get, you may not be in your remote audience's view if you go out of the camera frame, and it's easy to get distracted. And again, if you forget to look at the camera, you're disconnecting from your virtual audience. So you have to take all those things into consideration, and some questions that might help you determine that before you take this on is, first of all, what's the makeup of your audience? How many people are remote versus in person? A good rule of thumb is if most people are remote, then it probably makes sense for you to be remote. Now that could change if the people that are live are the decision makers. that may influence your decision. It might be better for you to be there. And maybe you have a sales rep who's going to be on site. So that makes that decision a little easier. But knowing where your audience is, who they are, where they're going to be is wise. What's the physical space setup? Whether you're going to be there in person or not, you need to know what is the live audience setup. How's the room set up? Where would you be if you were there, or the sales rep? Where's the audience? Where's the mic? Are you going to be seated or standing? Is there good lighting for the camera and for the, if there's a projector? And then, what's the technology setup? You may not have control over it, especially if you're remote, but you need to know what it is. What are they seeing? What's the, they have video conferencing, a projector, just a laptop. What are they doing? Is there a camera that's going to show the live audience a view for the remote audience? Do they have a digital screen so they can have one screen with the panel pictures of the remote audience so that they feel more connected? So all these things are really important. And then the remote technology, of course, if you're the remote presenter, you need to make sure that that audience is familiar with that platform, because if you use, say, WebEx, and you've invited your audience and they don't know how to raise hands on WebEx, or they don't know how to, participate or chat, you've got a learning curve, and that's going to log down your meeting by trying to explain that to them. So you need to cover those things in advance, making sure those people have their cameras on. And then additionally, is the sales rep going to present? How are you going to do that trade-off with the, if they have slides? Do you need to take breaks if it's longer than an hour? Certainly, especially for that remote audience. So those are all things you need to cover. I want to dive into a few things more specifically, a little deeper, and level set what we really need to accomplish in some of these areas to make it, to set ourselves up for success. The first thing that's, I think, of utmost importance is that we have adequate audio. People will put up with subpar video. We've all been on calls where it's like, that's a little grainy, right? But we'll stay tuned as long as we can listen, as long as we can hear clearly. But people will not put up with subpar audio. We were trying to watch a movie the other night, and the audio was so bad for some reason. It's like, it was visually, fascinating, but it's like, I don't know what's going on, right? So making sure you have a good audio setup is very important. And from that aspect, you really can't rely on your laptop and mic speaker alone. That's very rarely sufficient, even for a regular virtual meeting. It's really important to have high quality audio, and that often takes an external speaker, an external mic. Also in the room, of course, you want to make sure their audio and microphone is good. And having an external mic, like that's a little Jabra. And I'm not going to talk a ton about technology because there's so many different options, but having something that has the span to hear people's voices, and then perhaps having a handheld mic available for questions is really important. And we'll talk about questions in a moment, but that's where things can really get bogged down. You want to, optimize that visibility for everyone. What is everyone seeing? What do they need to see? What are they struggling to see? Starts with good front-facing lighting. And I think, we've all been on virtual presentations. We've seen enough of these hostage videos to know, okay, we need good lighting. And hopefully everybody on this call has figured that out in their own circumstances. But there's a whole nother level of consideration when you are on site. I did a hybrid presentation early on, and I got there and I didn't realize that until I stood up in front of the projector, that the audience could just, they could not see my face. I was kind of blacked out like this person here because of the lighting, because of the projector lighting, and there wasn't enough light in the room. So the virtual audience was having a really different experience than the live audience. So that's why we need to know what is on site. What does that setup look like? When we're talking about visibility, we also have to understand that if the camera doesn't see it, it didn't happen, right? It didn't happen for your virtual audience. And if you're remote, it didn't happen for your live audience. They don't know anything other than, what they're presented on this screen. So that means you have to manage that, and you have to make sure that your intentions match what actually the output is. And some things to keep in mind as, what do our participants need to see? Well, they obviously should be able to see you, right? So it means you need your camera on. The live audience needs to see you. The virtual audience needs to see you. They all should feel like, they are in a room with you is the goal. They should be able to see the presentation. They should be able to see any physical props or handouts, anything you're going to write on. And it's nice to see, but may require additional tech to see the other attendees. And that may be outside of your control. But some offices have that ability, that video conferencing setup to be able to do that. To create optimal visibility, there's a couple things that we want to ensure. We want to ensure, first of all, remote audience has their cameras on, right? They're participating. That will make them feel more accountable as well. If you're on site, you want to have, see if they have a separate screen so they can, to share the remote panel. They want to have, be able to see them, right? So they feel more connected with the virtual audience, right? As opposed to these split groups entirely. Use an external webcam. This is really important because if you're showing up live, you don't always know what the setup is. It gives you more flexibility. And I have been on the virtual end of, hybrid presentations where the presenter suddenly stands up and all I have is a view of their stomach, right? So because they're tied to that laptop camera. So give yourself that option by bringing a tripod or some kind of a stand to move that camera around as necessary. And you want to know your frame. When you are presenting live, you want to make sure you kind of walk your stage, see where the limits of the frame are in the camera. You can either record yourself or have someone, who's setting up with you, let you know, like, oh, you're out of frame right there. You can mark that spot with some tape or something just to make sure, or, kind of get your visual boundaries of where that is. But operate within that frame because, again, the audience loses you, it's a good chance for them to check out. When you are on site, if you are going to do some moving around or, when people ask questions, it's great to have someone ahead of time, move that camera for you. So move it so that they can, now your remote audience can also see who's asking the question, right? That gives them a more inclusive sort of experience. So having the ability to have that external camera is really important. Do all those, all your pointing, all your annotations on screen. It is tough to use a physical whiteboard and get that in frame, have it lit well enough as you're writing on it for it to translate to your virtual audience. That takes a little work and practice. So again, and if you don't have the good lighting or the framing, it's going to be really lost on your virtual audience. So let's talk about managing this face-to-face or virtual attendees. First of all, is there any questions about that particular, setup, setting yourself up for success? We have one question here. All right. We'll keep forging ahead, but feel free to ask questions.
I've got one actually.
Yeah.
So for a sales team or a sales engineering and sales team working together, how much prep time do you think they should devote to this, to being adequately set up and ready to present with the right, backgrounds and the right audio and the right visual, and having your handouts ready to be distributed both physically and remotely?
Well, I would say as much time as it takes, because if you're investing, your time in this meeting and, it's a demo, and hopefully you're doing a demo because you have done discovery, which is what we teach in Great Demo, right? It's not just, oh, I'll show up and hopefully they'll like something. It's not a spray and pray kind of deal. So hopefully there is something at stake, which means you should, invest the time in making sure all of these boxes are checked. And I'm going to give you a checklist at the end to help you do that, because otherwise there's still things that can happen that you will not be prepared for. But if you cover the things that you know could possibly happen that are important, and cover the audio and the visual and the handoffs and all those things, you are in much better shape. So that's not a very specific answer, but it takes what it takes, and you need to plan that time out ahead with your team to make sure you've orchestrated all those handoffs and potential issues that might come up.
Definitely. We had one more come in saying, asking if you have issues with virtual backgrounds, at least in Zoom and a couple other places that I've experienced personally. They can be a little weird and finicky sometimes. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I'm not a fan of virtual backgrounds anyway, because I think, we have this great opportunity to get to know each other. And part of that is knowing who you are and where you are. And here's your live audience. They're in a real place, and you're like on this Starship Enterprise. Certainly sometimes it's necessary, if that's your circumstance. I totally appreciate that. But I would say the virtual background it's background. And background means it shouldn't be anything that calls attention to itself or, is distracting in any way. And so if there's anything about it that is going to distract your audience, do not use it, because there are enough distractions. You don't need to add to that mix. Good question. All right, so let's talk about managing kind of those different sets of those two audience groups that we have. We've got face-to-face, we've got our virtual attendees. And this really starts, well before the demo, but we have to think about in terms of that those first 5 minutes are really critical, because that's going to kind of set the tone. And it's also going to, kind of solidify your relationships and how teach people how they're going to pay attention, and make people feel included or make them feel disengaged from the outset. Now, what's going to happen is, if you are live, your live audience is going to come in and you are going to get swept away. I know, I've done it, right? We're drawn to movement. We're drawn to people's physical presence. It will happen. So you have to remember to check your panel. You have to know that's going to happen, and really monitor yourself, right? You have to work hard at that. We're going to show you a system that's going to help you do that. Encourage that remote audience to join 5 to 10 minutes early, because your live audience will. That's how we've done it in the past. Like, people get to meetings a little early when they're live. When do they show up virtually? On the dot, right? Or a minute after. And they're already feeling left out. So whatever you need to do to encourage that remote audience to come early, make it fun, say, hey, we're going to do some introductions, or we're going to take a quick poll. I want to get your read on something. I'd like to introduce you to somebody, but encourage them to get there. First of all, it will make them feel more connected. It will also keep your first 5 minutes from being, oh, okay, I guess let me let John in. And, those are the things that just make those hybrid meetings just drag, right? The back and forth between the technology and letting people in and talking to the live audience. So try to avoid that by getting those remote audience members there early. Try to greet everyone as they enter, size allows, and repeat those introductions, right? You're sort of the host, you're sort of the middleman between, hey, live group, Bob and Jane just joined from Seattle, right? So you want to try to kind of foster that relationship between the two groups as well, because the live audience is going to be talking to each other, and the remote audience is kind of sitting there on their own, right? Because they don't necessarily, they're in their own little boxes as well, so they don't always connect. And then explain how each audience is going to engage, right? Because there's different sets of rules depending on where they are. So you need to tell people right away, like, okay, so when, if you have a question, here in the room, please raise your hand or shout it out. If you're online, please, type it in chat or raise your virtual hand. And like I said, make sure they know the platform. That's something, I would send out ahead of time just to make sure. So you're not suddenly giving a lesson on, Teams or Zoom. You want to think about designing activities for all your attendees. Whatever you're going to do, you have to review that activity and say, how is each group going to engage with this? And what's the best possible experience for them? And here's just a couple of examples, like, okay, how do I want them to engage, when I ask questions, or how do I want them to ask questions? What about handouts, right? Handouts, obviously I can hand out in person, but I'm gonna have to pre-send those. How can I do polls, right? Obviously easier virtually. Now, remember, you've got to do some math when you have a live audience and a virtual audience. And so, you've got to have a way to easily master that. Whiteboards, or if you're taking questions, if you're parking those questions and you're used to doing that on a flip chart or a whiteboard, those are things that are probably best online, because that's going to level the playing ground so everybody sees the same real estate at that point. And then when it comes to, managing those questions for each audience group, what I recommend is printing off a list of all participants by remote audience and live audience, and checking those names off, so that you don't just suddenly realize you've talked to only your, face-to-face group. That will help you kind of rotate. Remember giving your remote audience instructions on how to answer or how to ask a question, and giving them time to find their virtual hand, their unmute, right? And then really important to repeat those questions. Okay. Did you get kicked off again, Garrett?
You did, yes. So there was just a confusion with Zoom accounts and who's hosting. And so I think we've got it sorted now.
Okay.
Should be good to go. Again,
Right.
what you're saying, what happens live, right?
What is that? This is part of the deal. And I think what's happened over the last 2 years is that people have more patience for this type of thing, because we've all been the receiver and the the participant in some of these challenges. Technology never fails, Jason says. Yes, right.
Looks like we lost your video, Julie.
Okay. Well, let's see there. All right. Well, I'm not sure why that is. We had it there behind. Okay, well, we're going to carry on anyway. All right. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. So we were talking about managing questions, managing our audience questions, right? So let me share my screen here. Okay. So making sure that we have a list that we check. I think I got through all this, right? Making sure your remote audience knows how to answer the questions, repeat all questions. And it's very important to make sure that everybody, gets seen and heard when they ask a question, and also that we let people answer it. We let people answer our question, and that means we have to pause. And sometimes we have to pause longer than we feel comfortable with. And this is really especially true in, virtual presentations and demos. But I want to give you an example of what happens just on the virtual end of, when someone asks a question. When you ask a question, your virtual audience, and to an extent your live audience as well going through this, it just takes longer virtually. They're thinking, okay, what do I think of that question? Do I have an answer? Should I share it because there's other people in the group? And then they start negotiating, like, well, I bet Bob is going to answer this. or surely someone else is. Then that pressure starts to build and they think, well, they're not going to answer it. I guess I could jump in. And then they have to unmute themselves, right? So that can take a little minute, you know? So we need to make sure that we take that into consideration and we allow that pause to take place, right? So very important to make that happen. When you are taking questions, it's great to have someone else on site handle the question, you know, who's asking the question, giving them the handheld mic, unless you have tested that speaker or that microphone, that conference room microphone, and made sure that people who are at the farthest reaches of the table can still be heard, which isn't always the case. I was at an event and, you know, even just passing around the handheld microphone, it's really easy for people to forget. And somebody will start on their question and it's like, oh, wait, give them the microphone, right? So there's this delay. It's almost like you have to train people. And if you have someone assigned to that job, it goes much more smoothly. But there's also there's some different types of mic. I like this tossable mic, catch box, and I'm sure there's probably some other ones that, you know, just throw it to the person. It makes it kind of fun live that they get to then talk into it. But that's one option. But remember that the camera is the eyes of your audience, right? So we need to make sure that we use that well. Most demos end up looking like, you know, to the receiving group, you know, we're looking at the SE's forehead most of the time, right? Because they're down in their screen. And we want to find moments to really connect with our audience, because if you're not actively looking at the camera, you're not actively connecting with your customer, and they don't care that it's hard and that you have a lot going on, right? That all they know is that it feels like, you know, you're not making this effort to connect with them. And if you're remote, both your remote audience and your live audience will feel that way. So we have to find ways to do that and times to do that, which I'm going to talk about here. So let's talk about that, you know, that interaction and that engagement, how we can make that more, you know, make people feel engaged. First of all, we have to plan it. We have to drop that wishful thinking. That is, if I say, oh, you know, I want this to be interactive and I want to please ask questions as you go, that's just white noise to customers at this point. It's like, especially if they think they're you know, they're in receiving mode. If they think they're receiving a demo, they're not necessarily, you know, their mode wasn't to come and engage necessarily. So you need to take that into consideration. And that means you have to set those expectations early. You have to start early, get them engaged. That's why greeting them, having those moments before is really important. Or having them, you know, like we did when we started, you know, type into chat, where are you? You know, what's your biggest challenge today? Open with a poll, just get some interaction going. In terms of interaction engagement, remember your remote audience is always going to be more passive. And that's not just in a hybrid situation. We've all experienced that, right? The virtual audience is more passive. So you have to work harder to draw out those remote participants. Your live audience will likely be, you know, they'll kind of handle their own activity, right? They typically participate more without a lot of instigation. So that means you have to make sure that you don't let the in-person attendees dominate the discussion, which can happen. So it's important, if you see that happening, to stop and say, oh, that, you know, that's, you know, see someone that's always asking a question or always who's live, who's kind of dominating, to say, you know, that's a great point, Sherry. Let's hear what David has to say, right? And invite other people in. So you really are playing the host, and your audience is going to look for you to do that. You've probably been on a remote meeting or a hybrid meeting where somebody just, or any meeting where somebody dominates and you're like, gosh, I wish somebody would stand up and let some other people interact. So you can do that nicely. Again, let the remote participants know how to engage, make it very easy for them. I always say, check your remote panel first. You will naturally see in your line of vision, wherever you're looking, you will see that your live audience might have a question, but go to your virtual panel first. It's a good trained skill to do that. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but look to them first, see if they have a question, and then you can go to your live audience. And it certainly rotate between those two groups. This is really a great technique to improve engagement. I would say it's the simplest, cheapest way to improve interaction, and that is to look at the camera when you ask a question. That will make your remote audience feel like you're talking right to them. Your live audience, you're going to naturally have more eye contact with them anyway. So and if you're remote and you're looking at the camera, then your live audience will also feel like you're talking to them. So that really will improve the response rate to your questions. If you look at a camera, ask the question, and hold your gaze there. And then also find times to go full camera. As you can see, if you look at the picture on the right, it's very hard to engage with this little tiny square of a person up here in the corner of the screen, right? So go full camera when you don't need to be in your software. And sometimes you want to do that would be, when you are taking questions, right? It's a great time to go full camera. When you are summarizing, right? When you don't need to be in the software, those are great times to connect with your audience. So let's talk about, how we gauge attention and interest of our audience. Like, what are they feeling? What is going on with them? How can we monitor that in these two disparate groups? We really have to learn to read the room and read the Zoom, right? So reading the room is pretty easy. We've been trained as human beings to read other people's expressions and reactions and body language. So we, in a sense, don't need a ton of training in that, other than we need to remember to do it a lot of times. But reading the Zoom is another skill. And we need to really hone that, and we need to understand what's different about that. So we've got a number of things that we want to read. We want to understand what's happening with our customer, but we've also got a lot of, we're showing software, we're managing, maybe people coming into the meeting, or tools and technology. So we want to develop a system of how we're going to, connect, what we're going to look at, and making sure that we are reading the room when we need to, but we're not getting stuck there, and we're still making time to connect with our audience. So I love this. Peter Cohen came up with what he called the Zoom scan, which is, it's not exclusive to Zoom, of course, but like anything you put Zoom with, it's kind of catchy. And it's really just a systematic way to manage all your inputs. And much like learning to drive, if you go back to, maybe you're teaching your teenager to drive right now, and you're reminded of what a challenge that really was when you first got in a car. You had to, there's all these different inputs. There's all these controls. There's the speedometer, there's the gas, there's the radio, there's the windows, there's the rear view mirror, there's, maybe a person next to you talking. You didn't just instantly know how to do all that, right? You focused on one thing at a time. It's like, okay, start the car, right? Okay, get it out of park. Look where you're going. You should probably do that before you get it out of park. But, you go through a process, and now think how you do it. You get in a car, you go. You're playing with the radio, you're talking to somebody, you're on your phone, you're also scanning for cars. You have learned a way to do all that, but you didn't learn it all at once. And this is the same idea, this virtual skill that we have to develop, which is just as important in these hybrid situations as well, is we have to be able to manage all those inputs, and the Zoom scan is a way to do that. So I just want to share with you, this is sort of my version of the Zoom scan, which is just again, a way of how I manage my inputs, where I try to look and keep my focus. So first of all, greeting attendees, checking the panel, checking the camera, checking the room if I'm in the room, right? Doing that in a methodical way. Then, of course, when you share your content, you've got to look at your platform. Then you want to check for questions. I like to start first looking for remote questions. So I'm going to look at my panel. I'm going to, when someone responds, I'm going to look at my camera if they're remote, or if I'm remote and they're live, either way, because it's going to make them feel like I'm, more attentive. I'm listening to them as opposed to my head down. And then when I ask a question, I'm going to ask it to the camera. So again, improve my response rate, right? People think, oh, she's talking to me, because everybody in your Zoom, your virtual audience will feel like, they're having this own personal experience with the camera, with you. And then when I want to check body language, I'm going to check the panel. And then I'm also going to, if I'm on site, then I'm also going to check the room, right? And when I summarize, I'm going to check the camera. So this is sort of a roadmap of where I'm going to focus, and knowing what task I'm doing and where my focus should be, and sort of doing this in a routine fashion, just like when you get in and start the car, is going to keep you less, more focused, and also give you something to fall back on. Now, I'm not saying you're going to be able to stick to this. It's going to go just like this, right? You're going to have somebody that, shouts out a question in your, live audience, and you have to deal with them, or you're going to have some, some content you're going to have to share. So you're going to get pulled out from that. But if you have a basic system in place, and you know where your focus is best spent, and you know that it's being distributed through these different channels more equitably, I guess is the word, then you're coming from a much stronger place than if you're just winging it, right? So that is, again, sort of the idea is to have a system onto how you're going to engage with your audience. Now, you may have thought as you were looking at that Zoom scan, it's like, well, gosh, I'm not looking at my live audience very much if I'm in person. And to that I say, do not worry. Do not worry. If you are live and you have your live audience there, your eyes will naturally and constantly be drawn to that audience. They will not suffer as much as your Zoom audience was. So try to stick to that Zoom as much as possible. You'll keep getting caught looking at your live audience. That's not going to be a problem, I assure you. Also, what we want to do to read our audiences, we can use our peripheral vision. And it's much easier to use your peripheral vision when you're live. You can be looking at your screen, and you'll see when your live audience is kind of, bubbling up. They look like they want to ask a question, or they got their hands up. You will see that because we can see movement. We can see major changes in expression or body language just with our peripheral vision. We can also see that in our remote audience when we're looking at the camera, which is a learned skill, like that driving. So there's really three ways for reading body language virtually that I want to share with you. And the first is this more of a macro level, which is that using your peripheral vision, which will give you a good, large picture view of what's going on with your audience. Then you want to have some times where you're checking in on a micro level, like where you're actually looking at that person on the panel, or you're looking at your live audience. And you want to do that when you've noticed something in your peripheral vision that calls your attention, right? You've seen a major change in behavior. You've seen somebody moving around a lot or nodding their head. So that's when you want to do those micro check-ins. But you want to check in no more than every 30 seconds, because otherwise you're doing this thing where you're kind of, back and forth and shifty-eyed with the camera, and that makes you look uncertain or untrustworthy, neither of which we want. And then, of course, there are times where you can take what I call sneak peeks at your audience. Anytime that your audience is focused on something else, whether that is another speaker or they're looking at, the software on the screen, that's a good time for you to check their body language, because you're not losing that connection because they're not necessarily looking at you. Now, when you are reading that body language, it's important to remember that you can't assign in-person meaning to on-screen behavior. People show up differently on video than they do in person. They are typically going to be more passive, which is that, more laid back body language. Their facial expressions are passive, and they're looking down because they're looking at their screen. And we often panic and think, oh my gosh, they're bored, and we start rushing and get anxious. Again, that's on-screen behavior. If you contrast that with your live audience, it's probably very different. There's a facial expression that is very common virtually that we need to be aware of, which I call RBF. And it's not what you think it is. It is resting business face, right? And that's the face that many people just show up on camera with, on video. And it doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's just they're kind of that natural resting face when people are in receiving mode, right? Or they're watching a presentation. They look sometimes disinterested. So reading too much into that is not going to, it's going to cause you to panic. What you want to do when you're reading virtual body language is to look for clusters of information. If they look disinterested, and they're also, you ask them something and their tone is distant or flat, or they're slow to respond, or their expression is unrelated to what you're saying or sharing, or this is the one eye contact side I say is worrisome, is when people's eyes are moving from left to right repeatedly. That's often a sign they're reading something, right? They're doing something. If they're looking down, they're probably just looking at their screen. So that doesn't necessarily indicate a problem, but you want to look for multiple signals that they're not engaged, and then you can react accordingly, check in. Okay, so lastly, how can we make this all easier? We can use a producer or a champion to improve that flow, because frankly, this can feel a lot like a one-person show without a little help, right? When you are on site or remote, either way, in this hybrid situation, it's great to have a producer. And that's just a team member, it could be a sales rep, it could be a support member who joins your virtual meeting, monitors all those remote channels, making sure, people can get in, that they can hear, they can see, all those technical issues, really frees you up to focus on what you need to do. So some of the specific ways they can help: they can come in early, test the platform, all the, video tools, annotations. They can let people in, they can record or take notes. They can manage that tech support, monitor chat. They can read body language for you, right? And, send you signs, a text, or however you want to set up that channel to communicate of something that you need to be alerted to. And basically leave you to focus on your audience and your message. When you are remote, I suggest you recruit a champion. And champion could be your salesperson on site too, right? But it could be your champion at the client's on-site location. And that's just someone who can assist you in managing and monitoring both the in-person participants and the on-site technology. And again, they can test that on-site audio and video, make sure everything, everybody can hear. They can let you know when people arrive or leave, because you may not have a good view of your live audience if you're remote. So they can do introductions. They can let you know if it looks like, hey, it looks like we have a question here, or it looks like, Sue and Jan were having a conversation about this. They can repeat those questions for you. And again, they can also read that live body language that you can't see and let you know about any potential issues. So those are really, I think, two important roles to fill when you're in this hybrid situation that will save you so much trouble and potential issues. What I did was I put together a checklist, and I'm going to give you my email so you can reach out if you want a copy of it, which is really things that you want to consider before the meeting. Like, I need to recruit a champion and a producer, right? We need to set up a channel to how we're going to communicate during the demo. I need to print out those lists of who's participating. I need to test the audio, the camera, the lighting, screen share. Are we going to go speaker? Do I want them to be in speaker or gallery view? Just all these questions that we want to make sure we address that may be slightly different whether you're remote or in person. During the demo, some of the things that we want to monitor, telling them how to interact, when do we look at the camera to engage, checking in our audience, rotating questions, repeating questions, annotation on screen. So all these things just to remind ourselves to follow. And like driving a car, this may have to be a very sort of methodical process the first few times. We have not necessarily developed the muscle memory to do this. And so it's going to feel a little mechanical at first, but that's okay. That's how you learn to drive. That's how you learn to do, ride a bike, everything. So take the time to do that because it's really going to be valuable and make your life so much easier and make that demo more successful. So let me share with you here my email so you can reach out if you'd like a copy of that checklist, and also send you a free chapter of my new book, Look Me in the Eye, or you can pick up a copy on Amazon if you'd like. And with that, I'll open it up to questions. Let me give you my contact information here. If you would like to reach out, I'd love to hear from you, and let's see what you guys have on your minds.
Yeah, let's take a couple of questions before we go here. Anyone have anything on the line?
So it says, Mike here says, it seems like the more people that are on video, the more cameras on, results in a degradation of video quality. For example, you don't see us right now. True, that's certainly a factor. I don't think we want to use that to not have our cameras on. I think as a presenter, it's of utmost importance that they see you, not necessarily the others on the the other group. Any tips for not looking at yourself when you're in a team meetings? Absolutely, turn that view off. There's no reason to look at yourself while you're presenting. The time to look at yourself is when you're practicing, when after you've recorded yourself. It's a really, it's just a really unfortunate habit, because what happens is you're going to see yourself and you're not going to like something. Nobody looks at themselves and goes, oh, I look fantastic right now. You won't like something. You'll start to fixate on it, and it'll just pull you out of the moment, right? So prepare yourself as best you can. Learn your virtual frame. Make sure you know how to look at the camera. Make sure you have all those skills down, which is why I wrote the book, right? So you don't have to, as you're in the meeting, go, okay, now, am I looking at the camera? Oh, nope. You don't want that to be part of your demo. You want to have that muscle memory already. Anything else? Any
Thanks
others?
for answering.
Yeah.
I'm dropping the book link in one more time for those that are still on here. Looks like we have one more question. And we'll make this the last. When technology is starting to fail, at what time do you determine to reschedule the meeting?
Okay, so it depends on what that technology is. If you can't show anything, I think with demos, there's two things that can fail. There's the software, that can be a problem, but you might be able to still show slides, right? So I always suggest, and we suggest this in Great Demo, that you have, your situation slide, you have the illustration, that end result, a great screen, beauty shot of your software that you can show and you can kind of high level demo to without being in the software. So that's a good save to have. I always have that in my back pocket. If you just have no technology working, you have to think, could this perhaps be better served as more of a discovery call, and we reschedule.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we're at time now. Thank you everyone for your patience with us with these couple of hiccups that we had. And thank you to Julie again for joining us and for this amazing presentation. Awesome thoughts and great insights coming out of it.
Yeah, my pleasure. And reach out with any questions if we didn't get to answer them. I'm happy to take them offline. So julie@actingforsales.com or juliehansen.live is my website.
Awesome. All right. Thank you all. The recording for this will come out in the next couple of days, and we hope to see you for our next webinar. Thanks.